August 19, 1944, East Prussia. At Hitler's Wolf's Lair, General Alfred Jodl leaned over a map of France lit by the yellow glare of a desk lamp. The red arrows showing Patton's advance had stretched too far, too fast. 400 miles from the Normandy beaches. His staff had done the math. An armored division burned 150,000 gallons of fuel every single day. The Americans had no rail lines, no captured ports, and the roads were ruins. "This is the end of their advance," one colonel said. "Within 48 hours, their tanks will stop." Jodl agreed. No army in history has ever outrun its own supplies. But 125 miles away, the impossible was already happening. 5,958 trucks, each packed with ammunition, rations, and fuel, were rolling east in an unbroken line, headlights blazing through the night. They carried 2,500 tons of supplies every 24 hours. Their drivers didn't know it yet, but they were about to do something no army had ever done before. Feed a blitzkrieg in reverse. The Germans had invented lightning war. Now they were about to learn what it felt like to be on the wrong end of industrial lightning. For a week, German reconnaissance aircraft radioed the same report. Continuous traffic. Headlights visible for 20 kilometers. No spacing, no blackout. It made no sense. To move like that at night was suicide. One well-placed artillery strike could have destroyed an entire convoy. But the Americans didn't care. They weren't hiding. They were moving too fast to hit. Within 72 hours, Patton's tanks smashed through the Seine defenses. Within 7 days, they entered Paris. Within a month, they reached the German border. The Wehrmacht's greatest logisticians, men who had watched the Russian steppes swallow their own supply lines, were forced to accept the unthinkable. The Americans had achieved what even Guderian had called impossible. Fuel had become a weapon. Motion itself was now a form of firepower. The Red Ball Express had been born out of panic. When traditional depots and railheads collapsed under Patton's advance, a handful of officers met in a French chateau and wrote a single sentence on a chalkboard. Create a one-way highway. No stops, no excuses. Within 36 hours, it was real. 2 parallel roads. One for loaded trucks eastbound, one for empties returning. Convoys running 20 hours out of every 24. Headlights on full beam. Drivers forbidden to stop for anything short of death or fire. Military police cleared the roads of anyone going under 25 miles per hour. And those drivers, 23,000 men, 3 out of every 4 African American, would keep that system alive for months, through rain, fog, and enemy shell fire. They called their trucks Patton's Blood Bank, Hitler, Here We Come, and Detroit to Berlin Express. But the Germans were watching. On August 30th, 1944, a single panzer battery spotted the moving river of headlights outside Chartres. What happened next would test whether the Red Ball Express could survive its first real attack. August 30th, 1944. Outside Chartres, a German panzer battery waited in silence. The gunners could see the lights of the American convoy miles away, an endless chain of moving stars, a line so bright it looked like a second Milky Way stitched to the earth. When the lead trucks came into range, the Germans opened fire. Shells exploded among the convoy. Tires shredded. Gasoline tankers turned into fireballs. For 5 minutes, it was chaos. Men diving for ditches, cargo burning, engines screaming. Then something happened the Germans didn't expect. The column didn't stop. American MPs waved traffic through the flames. Wrecked trucks were shoved into ditches to clear the road. Within 15 minutes, the Red Ball was moving again. 35 miles per hour. Formation intact. Mobile maintenance crews arrived before the fires even burned out, swapping engines and towing wrecks aside. By dawn, the entire route was open again. German reconnaissance pilots watching from above reported back in disbelief. Convoy continues. No delay. Their commander, General Edgar Feuchtinger of the 21st Panzer Division, wrote, "They violate every principle of military science. It is not tactics. It is industry on wheels." That phrase spread through the Wehrmacht like a virus. Industry on wheels. Every calculation German logisticians had trusted was wrong. They had measured warfare in tons per mile, in hours of rest, in fuel efficiency. The Americans measured it in motion. They planned for 20% mechanical failure every day, and simply replaced what broke. They burned 300,000 gallons of fuel daily just to keep their own trucks running, more than some German armies received for all purposes, and somehow fuel never ran out. That was the second miracle. Because while the Red Ball thundered across France, another operation, Pluto, pipeline under the ocean, was quietly pumping gasoline through underwater pipes from England straight into Normandy. By September, fuel flowed through hidden steel arteries under the channel, invisible to German reconnaissance. Forward depots were spaced every 25 miles, tanker convoys running beside the main route so that no truck ever waited more than 10 minutes to refuel. When German General Walter Warlimont saw aerial photos of those dumps, he said, "They burn more gasoline moving gasoline than we allocate to entire panzer divisions." It wasn't war the way the Germans understood it. It was industrial overflow. Each truck, a GMC CCKW, deuce and a half, could carry 5,000 pounds of cargo over 350 miles in 14 hours. 5,900 of them made 1.5 trips per day, hauling 89,939 tons of supplies in the first week alone. Mobile cranes could replace an engine in 45 minutes. Mechanics had a 15-minute rule: fix it or shove it off the road. What the Germans called waste, the Americans called momentum. But the price was brutal. Drivers ran 20-hour shifts, doped on benzodrine, hallucinating from exhaustion, sleeping in their seats as trucks bounced over cratered roads. 300 would die before the Red Ball Express shut down. Still, morale never collapsed. These men, mostly black soldiers serving in a segregated army, understood the irony. They were keeping the most celebrated white general in Europe moving, and they were doing it better than any German theorist believed possible. By the first week of September, Patton's spearheads were advancing 50 miles per day. German commanders stopped laughing. Field Marshal Model summed it up in a single line: "We face not an army, but a civilization." But the story wasn't over. Because what the Germans didn't yet know, what even the Americans couldn't predict, was that the Red Ball's own success would create a new crisis. Speed itself would become the enemy. Stay with me, because in the next 48 hours, Patton's advance outran the Red Ball Express itself. September 3rd, 1944. 3 days after Paris fell, Patton's Third Army had pushed so far east that even the Red Ball convoys couldn't catch it. The leading tanks were running on fumes, drivers siphoning gas from wrecked vehicles, artillery units down to their last shells. The very machine that had broken the German front was about to break itself. A single number told the story. 12 divisions advancing on a front 60 miles wide consumed 12,000 tons of supplies every day. But the Red Ball could move only 10,000 before fuel burn, and distance cut into its capacity. Every extra mile forward meant fewer tons delivered. Colonel Charles O. Thrasher of the advance section stared at his maps and said quietly, "We're chasing our own shadow. To solve it, he did something no logistics manual allowed. He turned the convoys into mobile depots. Trucks stopped unloading at fixed points. Instead, they met combat units on the move, transferring cargo straight into tanks and half-tracks beside the road. Ammunition dumps appeared in open fields, guarded by MPs with orders to shoot looters on sight. Mechanics worked from moving vehicles, changing tires and filters without stopping. German spotters watching from church towers couldn't make sense of it. Their reports read like madness. Enemy units resupplied while advancing. No rear area observed. Every calculation collapsed again. The Americans had removed distance from the equation. Fuel trucks became the lifeblood. Each carried 750 gallons, enough to move an armored battalion another 10 miles. Tanker convoys ran 25 minutes apart. Delay one and the next would push through. Over 300,000 gallons a day flowed just to keep the Red Ball moving itself. Fuel feeding fuel in an endless loop. And through it all, the drivers kept improvising. When bridges failed, engineers built bypasses overnight from rubble. When tires shredded, crews melted rubber in makeshift kilns to patch tubes. When maps ran out, they followed tire tracks. By September 10th, the system had evolved beyond recognition. 6 parallel routes, 24-hour dispatch, and 5,000 trucks in constant motion. German intelligence intercepted the new call signs: White Ball, Green Diamond, Red Lion, and concluded the Americans had infinite highways. But the cost was mounting. Engines overheated, men collapsed at the wheel, and the trucks themselves began to wear out faster than factories could replace them. Within weeks, mechanical failure rates hit 30% per day, yet somehow the flow continued. Because behind the convoys stood an invisible network of replacement yards and field repair teams, American industry projected onto French soil. General Walter Model finally put it into words. They are not fighting us with soldiers. They are fighting us with factories. Still, the miracle had limits. By mid-September, Patton's lead elements reached the Moselle River, and for the first time, the tanks stopped. Gasoline stocks were gone. The Red Ball had met geography itself. How the Americans broke that deadlock, and why a handful of engineers would rebuild an entire bridge in 14 hours to restart the drive, comes next. September 12, 1944. Patton's spearheads reached the Moselle River and stopped. The last convoys had emptied their tanks 40 miles behind them. Fuel drums sat trapped on the western bank because every bridge east of Le Mans had been blown apart by retreating German engineers. The Wehrmacht calculated confidently 6 weeks to rebuild crossings. The American offensive is finished. They were off by 41 days. At 0200, U.S. Army engineers from the 1056th Engineer Group arrived at the ruins of the bridge at Mantes. The Germans had dropped it clean, steel spans gone, pilings shattered. The official timetable for replacement was 42 days. They did it in 14 hours. They used Bailey Bridge sections, modular, prefabricated trusses designed in Britain and mass-produced in American factories. Each span weighed 1.5 tons, each panel locked with 4 pins. In theory, it required cranes and dry ground. In practice, men dragged them through mud under artillery fire, using wrecked German trucks as anchors. By sunrise, the first test truck rolled across, a 2.5-ton GMC loaded with artillery shells. The deck groaned but held. By noon, Red Ball convoys were crossing the Moselle as if the bridge had always existed. German spotters reported the impossible again. Bridge repaired overnight. Traffic continuous. Their commander refused to believe it, until Luftwaffe reconnaissance confirmed the new structure glinting in the morning haze. That same day, a second crossing opened at Ardennes, built in 13 hours, spanning 450 feet of river. Engineers worked waist-deep in water while shells fell around them, guided by flashlights and tracer fire. When the last span locked into place, one officer muttered, "We've built faster than they can destroy." This became the pattern. In 3 weeks, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers built or rebuilt 40 bridges, established 15 major fuel depots, and created 26 maintenance stations. Each one appeared almost overnight. No planning conferences, no delay, just motion. German observers couldn't comprehend the pace. Their logistics manuals measured time in weeks. The Americans measured it in shifts. To them, an engineer was not a planner, but a weapon. And while the bridges rose, the Red Ball adapted again. Convoys now carried not just fuel and shells, but bridge parts, steel decking, and pre-welded beams, supplies for construction, not just consumption. Logistics had become self-replicating. By late September, the American advance was moving again. Fuel lines stretching 700 miles from Normandy to the German frontier. Patton's armor surged forward, his columns averaging 40 to 60 miles per day. But the speed that had won the campaign was about to collide with something no engineer could outbuild. Autumn weather, collapsing morale, and the human limit of 23,000 exhausted drivers. Stay with me, because the next stretch of road wasn't just dangerous, it was fatal. Late September 1944. The Red Ball Express had been running for a month without pause. 20 hours a day, every day. Drivers lived on caffeine tablets, cold rations, and nerves. The air smelled of oil, dust, and benzodrine. A single trip from Normandy to the front was 350 miles each way, 14 hours forward, 12 back. Most men drove 1,000 miles per week. Engines ran until they seized, and drivers stayed behind the wheel until they collapsed. They began seeing things that weren't there. Phantom headlights in the fog, voices on empty radios. One quartermaster clerk recorded accidents every 11 minutes on average across the route. The roads themselves were wearing out. Constant traffic tore up the French asphalt, filling the air with gravel dust that blinded convoys. Mudslides swallowed trucks whole. When it rained, it wasn't a highway anymore. It was a brown river lined with wrecks. Still, the line moved, because stopping wasn't an option. Patton's tanks burned 800,000 gallons of fuel a day. One missed convoy could halt an entire army. To keep the wheels turning, maintenance units created rolling workshops. Trucks carried spare axles, fuel pumps, and engines. Mechanics performed repairs roadside in under 15 minutes, or pushed dead vehicles into ditches. A truck that slowed the line was stripped for parts where it fell. German pilots tried to break the chain. Luftwaffe strafing runs hit the convoys outside Reims and Soissons, destroying dozens of vehicles. But by nightfall, the same stretches were jammed with fresh trucks. "They can't possibly replace this many," one pilot radioed. He was wrong. Detroit could, and did. Morale cracked, but didn't collapse. The drivers, most of them young black men from Louisiana, Texas, and Ohio, turned exhaustion into defiance. They blasted swing records on field radios, painted slogans on their hoods. No gas, no glory. Hitler's headache. Keep 'em rolling. Many never came back. Official records list over 300 killed, mostly from accidents, not enemy fire. A few convoys vanished in fog, trucks found days later at the bottom of ravines. But there was no time for funerals. Their replacements climbed into the same cabs and kept going. Captured German officers couldn't believe it. "Your men drive until they die," one said after the war. Our men would have mutinied. Yet to the drivers, it was more than duty. It was proof. They were serving a country that still segregated them, yet they were sustaining its most famous general. They knew Hitler called them inferior. Every mile they drove made him a liar. By October, the Red Ball Express had delivered over 400,000 tons of supplies, and Patton's army stood on the edge of Germany. But winter was coming, and the roads would soon turn to ice. What the Germans couldn't destroy, nature now threatened to finish. Stay with me. Because the next obstacle wasn't a battle or a bridge. It was mud, frost, and exhaustion strong enough to stop an army that didn't know how to stop. October 1944. The French sky changed. Rain arrived first, then cold, then weeks of gray that turned every road into a swamp. Engines coughed in the damp air. Canvas tarps froze stiff. The Red Ball Express, once a roaring river of trucks, became a crawl through mud. The convoy stretched for hundreds of miles, wheels spinning uselessly, mud splattering windshields so thick drivers couldn't see 10 feet ahead. Vehicles sank to their axles. It could take 2 hours to move a single mile. Fuel drums slipped from trailers and rolled into ditches. Drivers chained tires, filled axles with gravel for traction, and pushed with bare hands. They slept standing up, leaning against hoods that steamed from rain hitting hot metal. Commanders counted losses differently now, not in trucks, but in time. Deliveries that once took 14 hours now took 36. Every day lost meant another armored regiment starved of fuel. To fight weather, the Americans turned to quantity again. Extra convoys, more trucks, longer shifts. The Red Ball's strength wasn't speed anymore. It was mass. If one road vanished, another appeared. By mid-October, 6 alternate routes ran east, some over farm fields compacted into emergency highways. German intelligence couldn't track them. Each morning, new road signs painted overnight marked fresh paths through villages the Wehrmacht had already mapped as impassable. Aerial photographs showed tire scars across farmland. No logic, just movement. The drivers learned a new rhythm. Shift gears by sound, steer by instinct, ignore exhaustion. They were mechanics, navigators, and survivors all at once. Reports from the advance section noted that 1/3 of all convoys operated without working headlights or windshields by November. Fuel still flowed, up to 300,000 gallons per day through Operation Pluto's underwater pipelines. But getting it to the front was slower than ever. The Germans noticed the hesitation. They began probing again along the Ardennes, waiting for the Americans' momentum to stall completely. By early December, the front froze solid. Ice turned every turn into a trap. Trucks skidded into one another, chain reactions of wreckage across the narrow roads. Some drivers used grenades to thaw frozen tires, tossing them under the wheels and gunning the engines through the blasts. Through it all, supplies kept reaching Patton's men: ammunition, rations, winter coats, spare parts. By Christmas, they had delivered over 400,000 tons in just 83 days, despite terrain that should have stopped everything. But the reprieve was short. On December 16th, the horizon exploded with artillery flashes, the start of the German Ardennes offensive. The Red Ball Express, already on the edge of collapse, would now have to reverse direction under fire, feeding 2 armies at once. What began as a logistics miracle was about to become a rescue mission. December 16th, 1944. Before dawn, the Ardennes erupted. German artillery rolled through the forests like thunder. The counterattack, 200,000 men, 1,000 tanks, 2,000 guns, tore a hole 50 miles wide in the American line. The Red Ball Express, already strained to breaking, suddenly became the only lifeline for an army caught in winter's jaws. Within hours, the road network vanished under snow. Convoy markers disappeared. Trucks slid sideways on black ice. Radio contact failed. Some drivers followed the glow of artillery in the distance just to know which direction was forward. Fuel dumps west of Bastogne were hit first. Fires burned so hot the snow melted in circles around them. But before the flames died, new tankers were already on the move. 750-gallon loads, engines howling in the cold. They were told, if you can't see the road, follow the truck ahead. If you lose him, keep going anyway. The Red Ball's routes shifted overnight. What had been one-way highways now ran both directions, carrying men toward the fight and wounded away from it. The same trucks that had fueled the advance now hauled ammunition, medical supplies, and entire field hospitals into the snow. German units tried to cut them off. Panzer grenadiers ambushed convoys near St. Vith, firing from tree lines. Some trucks burned where they stood. Others simply pushed through, engines screaming, rubber melting from heat. In one 48-hour period, the quartermaster records list 162 trucks lost, but 2,400 reached Bastogne. Inside the town, surrounded and freezing, paratroopers of the 101st Airborne watched the first fuel trucks crawl in on December 22nd. Men cheered them like reinforcements. One driver stepped from his cab, covered in frost, and said only, "Next load's close behind." By Christmas Eve, the Red Ball convoys were moving at a rate no one believed possible in blizzard conditions, 8,000 tons per day through roads that hadn't been visible in weeks. Each driver carried extra gasoline in the cab for warmth. Some froze to death at the wheel, still clutching the controls. For the Germans, the sight of those trucks rumbling through snowdrifts ended any illusion of victory. A captured officer later admitted, "We thought cold and chaos would stop them." Instead, the weather became their armor. By New Year's Day, the German offensive was spent. The same logistics chain that had fueled the breakout from Normandy now powered the counterattack that crushed Hitler's last gamble. When Patton's Third Army turned north to relieve Bastogne, the Red Ball rolled with it. 3 convoys an hour, 24 hours a day, feeding tanks that couldn't have moved another mile without them. The winter cost hundreds of lives and thousands of vehicles, but it also cemented the Red Ball's legend. No supply system in modern warfare had ever sustained motion through weather, fire, and exhaustion this severe. By January 1945, the route that began as a desperate improvisation had become the spine of the Western Front. And yet, as the snow thawed and the war moved toward Germany, one final challenge waited: bridges destroyed, rivers rising, and a continent running out of roads. March 1945. The snow had melted into rivers, and the rivers had turned to obstacles. The Rhine lay ahead, a gray, swollen barrier half a mile wide. Every bridge east of Cologne was gone. The Germans had blown them all, confident that logistics, not bullets, would finally stop the Americans. They were wrong again. On March 7th, a patrol from the 9th Armored Division reached Remagen and found the Ludendorff Bridge still standing, its steel skeleton damaged but upright. Within minutes, infantry stormed across. Behind them, engineers swarmed the span with welding torches and timber. Within 24 hours, the first trucks of the Red Ball Express rolled over the Rhine. Mud-spattered GMCs carrying ammunition and gasoline drums stacked 3 high. It was the first mechanized crossing of Germany's heartland since Napoleon. German artillery shelled the bridge relentlessly, dropping hundreds of rounds every hour. One shell hit a convoy squarely, destroying 7 trucks and igniting thousands of gallons of fuel. Traffic halted for only 8 minutes. Then, the next line of vehicles surged forward through smoke. From the air, Allied reconnaissance photographed what looked like a moving causeway of steel. 2,000 trucks a day streaming east. The engineers reinforced the bridge with pontoon sections, then built 3 more crossings in a week. Logistics, not armor, had breached the Reich. Patton's columns fanned out across western Germany at a pace no staff officer had predicted, 40 to 60 miles per day, consuming 1 million gallons of fuel daily. The Red Ball convoys adapted again, creating the ABC route: Antwerp, Brussels, Charleroi, linking the ports directly to the new front. German prisoners forced to unload cargo called it the road that never ends. For the men driving it, Germany felt alien. Villages were silent, bridges half-collapsed, roads cratered. Yet the convoys kept their rhythm, engines droning, gears grinding, the smell of gasoline mixing with spring mud. Each load delivered meant another town taken without pause. In captured Wehrmacht journals, one officer wrote, "They advance faster than retreat is possible. We fight statistics, not soldiers. By late March, 500,000 tons of supplies had crossed the Rhine. American engineers were building fuel depots larger than entire German cities. Fields of drums stretching to the horizon, guarded by MPs with orders to shoot looters on sight. For the first time, German civilians saw the Red Ball Express up close. Endless convoys thundering through cobbled streets, headlights blazing in defiance of blackout orders that had ruled Europe for 5 years. To them, it was the sound of inevitability, the noise of a machine that had outlasted everything thrown at it. And still, the drivers kept moving east. The war was nearly over, but the trucks didn't know that. Their orders were simple: deliver, turn, repeat. Within a month, those same convoys would be hauling food instead of shells, feeding the same people who once fired at them. April 1945. The front was gone. German resistance had splintered into pockets, and the Wehrmacht no longer existed as an organized army. Yet the roads were never empty. The Red Ball Express still rolled, engines coughing through the ruins of towns that had no names left. Each day, the convoys delivered more than 10,000 tons of supplies: food, fuel, medical stock, even fuel for captured German vehicles now used by Allied units. The same trucks that had carried death were now carrying life. Drivers passed through landscapes of collapse, factories without roofs, bridges twisted like paper, civilians lining the roads with white flags. Some saluted the convoys, others simply stared. They had heard those engines for months and knew that sound meant the end. By mid-April, logistics overtook combat. Entire divisions paused not because of enemy fire, but to manage the sheer volume of movement. Engineers built temporary cities of supply, each larger than most German towns: 15 fuel depots, 26 maintenance centers, and miles of parking fields for vehicles awaiting new loads. The men who had once measured success in miles now measured it in hours between convoys. Drivers logged 1 million road miles every 3 days across Western Germany, more than the entire pre-war German rail network could have carried. African-American units, long ignored by headlines, were now recognized by name in official reports. The 3,640th Quartermaster Truck Company, the 3,916th, the 3,180th. The backbone of a victory no general could replicate. Commanders finally admitted what everyone in the cab already knew: the war had been won on wheels. One German officer captured near Kassel said it bluntly: "You fight like a factory moves, steady, endless, and without emotion." As April turned to May, the mission shifted again. When Patton's tanks reached Czechoslovakia and the Elbe, the Red Ball Express didn't stop. The same network began hauling food for civilians, fuel for power stations, and medicine for camps that had just been liberated. The system built to destroy became the first infrastructure of recovery. On May 8, 1945, when the guns fell silent, thousands of trucks were still moving. Convoys kept running for weeks afterward, their cargo lists changing from ammunition to bread, from artillery shells to baby formula. For many drivers, that silence felt strange. They had lived months inside the sound of engines, headlights, and horns. The quiet meant it was finally over. In total, the Red Ball Express delivered nearly 900,000 tons of material, ran over 15 million miles, and consumed tens of millions of gallons of fuel, enough to circle the Earth 600 times. It turned a continent into a supply line and erased the idea that logistics could limit war. But its legacy wasn't only industrial. It was human. 23,000 men who proved endurance could outlast fire, weather, and prejudice. They didn't wear medals. They wore dust, grease, and exhaustion. Yet without them, victory would have stopped somewhere in the mud outside Normandy. When the guns fell silent, the Red Ball Express didn't fade, it evolved. Its roads became the arteries of post-war Europe. The same routes that carried ammunition to Patton's tanks now carried flour, fuel, and the first shipments of reconstruction aid. Many of the men who drove those trucks stayed in Europe. They joined new transport units, helping rebuild French rail lines and bridges they had once raced across. The roads they'd carved into the mud became the foundation for modern highways. In Washington, staff officers studied the Red Ball operation for decades. They called it the first modern logistics network, a self-sustaining machine that could deliver anywhere, anytime, under any condition. From Korea to Vietnam to the Persian Gulf, every American supply chain since has carried its DNA. But for the soldiers who lived it, the legacy was quieter. They remembered the noise of engines echoing through fog, the glow of headlights on wet asphalt, the smell of gasoline and exhaustion. They remembered the friends who vanished into ditches and were replaced the next day by new faces, same uniforms, same resolve. Most of all, they remembered what it felt like to move faster than anyone thought possible. German archives later described the Red Ball Express as the most decisive non-combat operation of the war. They had learned the truth too late, that battles are won by motion, and motion is built on supply. From August to November 1944, the Red Ball Express moved enough material to equip an entire modern army. It powered the liberation of Paris, the drive to the Rhine, and the collapse of Nazi Germany. Its scale rewrote the mathematics of war. One convoy every 5 minutes, 5,000 trucks in constant rotation, 12,000 tons delivered daily. Behind those numbers stood men who fought with steering wheels instead of rifles. They turned production into power, improvisation into doctrine, and belief into momentum. When they finally shut down the route in late November 1945, the last convoy rolled west, empty trucks heading home through the same villages they had once thundered past. Locals stepped out to watch them go. For the first time, the road was quiet. What remained was a lesson carved in dust and diesel. The front line doesn't exist without the road behind it. And for a few extraordinary months, that road had a name: the Red Ball Express.